Chapter 8 of The Lady Macbeth of the Mzinsk district by Nikolai Leskov.
Oh, so that's it. Well, my dear friend, thank you. I was only waiting for this, cried Katerina Lvovna. Now one can see it will be neither your way nor my way.
With a sharp movement she threw Sergei from her and pounced on her husband from behind, and before Zinovey Borisych had time to reach the window, she had seized his throat with her thin fingers and had thrown him on the floor like a sheaf of damp hemp. Falling heavily, Zinovey Borisych struck the back of his head against the floor with such force that he was quite dazed. He had not expected such a quick ending. This first act of violence that his wife had used against him proved to him that she was prepared for anything if she could only free herself from him, and that his present position was one of great danger. Zinovey Borisych realized this in an instant, at the moment of his fall, and did not cry out, knowing that his voice could not reach anybody's ears, and might only hasten the end. He looked round in silence, and with an expression of wrath, reproach and suffering, his eyes rested on his wife, whose thin fingers were tightly squeezing his throat. Zinovey Borisych did not defend himself. His arms, with tightly clenched fists, lay stretched out, jerking spasmodically. One of them was quite free, the other Katerina Lvovna pressed to the floor with her knee.
"Hold him,"
she whispered to Sergei in an indifferent voice, and again turned to her husband. Sergei sat down on the master, pressing his two arms down with his knees, and tried to seize him by the throat under Katerina Lvovna's hands. But at the same moment he uttered a cry of despair. The sight of the man who had wronged him, and the desire for bloody revenge aroused in Zinovey Borisych all his remaining strength, and with a violent effort he was able to free his imprisoned arms from the weight of Sergei's knees, and seizing hold of Sergei's black locks, he bit at his throat like a wild beast. But it was not for long. Zinovey Borisych groaned heavily, and his head fell back. Katerina Lvovna, pale and hardly breathing, stood over her husband and lover. In her right hand she had a heavy metal candlestick, which she was holding by the top with the heavy parts downwards. A thin stream of red blood trickled down Zinovey Borisych's temple and cheek. "A priest!" Zinovey Borisych groaned hoarsely, and with loathing drew his head away as far as he could from Sergei, who was still sitting on him. "To confess!" he uttered still less distinctly, shivering and looking sideways at the hot blood that was thickening under his hair.
"You're good enough without that," murmured Katerina Lvovna. "Enough trifling with him," she said to Sergei. "Catch hold of his throat properly."
Zinovey Borisych gasped. Katerina Lvovna stooped down, and pressing her own hands over Sergei's, that were tightly clasped round her husband's throat, put her ear to his breast. After 5 quiet minutes she got up and said,
"Enough, that will do for him."
Sergei also rose and took a long breath. Zinovey Borisych lay dead, strangled, and with a cut on his temple. Under his head on the left side was a little pool of blood, which, however, now flowed no longer from the small wound that had become clotted and congealed with hair. Sergei carried Zinovey Borisych into the cellar under the floor of the little stone storeroom, where he himself had so recently been locked up by the late Boris Timofeyitch, and then returned to the attic. During this time, Katerina Lvovna, with the sleeves of her loose jacket tucked up and her skirts well lifted, had carefully washed away with bast and soap the blood stain left by Zinovey Borisych on the floor of his bedroom. The water had as yet not cooled in the samovar, out of which Zinovey Borisych, then master of the house, had been comforting his soul with poisoned tea, so the spot could be washed away without leaving any traces. Katerina Lvovna took a brass slop basin and a piece of soap to bast.
"Now give me a light,"
she said to Sergei, going towards the door.
"Lower, throw the lights lower,"
said she, carefully examining all the floors over which Sergei had dragged Zinovey Borisych on the way to the cellar. Only in 2 places on the painted floors there were 2 tiny spots the size of a cherry. Katerina Lvovna rubbed them with the bast, and they disappeared.
"That will teach you not to steal on your wife like a thief and watch her,"
said Katerina Lvovna, straightening herself and looking towards the storehouse. "Now it's all over," said Sergei, and shuddered at the sound of his own voice. When they returned to the bedroom, a thin streak of dawn appeared in the eastern sky, and the apple trees, faintly tinted with gold, looked through the green fence of the garden into Katerina Lvovna's room. The old clerk, with a short fur coat thrown over his shoulders, yawning and crossing himself, crept across the yard from the barn to the kitchen. Katerina Lvovna pulled the shutters carefully up by their strings, and attentively looked at Sergei as if she wanted to read his soul.
"Well, now you are a merchant,"
said she, placing her white hands on Sergei's shoulders. Sergei did not answer her. Sergei's lips trembled, and he shook all over as if with ague. Only Katerina Lvovna's lips were cold. After 2 days, large blisters caused by the use of a heavy spade and crowbar appeared on Sergei's hands. But because of them, Zinovey Borisych was so well stowed away in his cellar that without the aid of his widow or her lover, nobody could have found him till the day of the Last Judgment. End of chapter 8.